The massive transport ship Galactic Unity groaned like a dying whale as it hurtled through the dark void of space. Deep within its reinforced belly, something stirred that should have stayed asleep forever. Captain Rex's 4 eyes widened in terror as she watched the containment field's power readings drop to 0. The crimson warning lights bathed her blue-scaled face in an ominous glow. "No, no, no," she whispered, her clawed fingers dancing frantically across the control panel. "This can't be happening." Inside the maximum security chamber, a creature from nightmares began to wake. The Vorthok stretched its massive limbs, each movement causing the reinforced walls to buckle and crack. Its obsidian scales caught the dim emergency lighting, making it look like living shadow. When its eyes opened, they burned like twin stars. Going supernova, the beast had been sleeping for 300 years, but now it remembered everything. It remembered the taste of fear, the sound of screaming, and the sweet satisfaction of the hunt. Its psychic abilities reached out like invisible fingers, probing the minds of every living creature aboard the ship. All units, code black. "This is not a drill?" Captain Rex's voice echoed through the ship's corridors as her crew scrambled to their battle stations. But deep down, she knew it was already too late. The Vorthek's first psychic scream tore through the ship like a hurricane, shattering reinforced glass and sending sparks cascading from overloaded circuits. Lieutenant Kale, a seasoned warrior, from the ice planet Thyros, led his security team toward the containment area. His plasma rifle hummed with deadly energy, but his hands shook as the creature's psychic influence crept into his mind. Behind him, 3 of his soldiers had already collapsed, foam bubbling from their mouths as their minds shut down to protect themselves from the buffo-whelming terror. The Vorthok didn't just break out of its cage, it exploded through it. Metal that could withstand asteroid impacts crumpled like paper. The creature's claws, each one as long as a grown man's arm, carved through the ship's hull with surgical precision. It moved with the fluid grace of a predator that had never known defeat. Meanwhile, millions of miles away on Kepler Station, life continued as normal. The massive space station rotated slowly against the backdrop of distant stars, its millions of inhabitants going about their daily routines. In residential Block C, 8-year-old Ji-Ho Kim knelt on the carpet of his family's quarters, making swooshing sounds as he flew his toy starships in elaborate battle formations. "Pew, pew, pew," he called out, crashing one ship into another. Good guys always win." His father Minho sat nearby reading a datapad about mineral extraction reports from the outer colonies. He was a quiet man who worked in the station's engineering department, more comfortable with machines than people. His wife Sora watched the evening news on their wall screen while folding Jeho's tiny clothes. "There's some kind of incident near the shipping lanes," she said, frowning at the reporter's words. "A military transport is requesting emergency assistance." Minho glanced up from his pad. "Probably just engine trouble. Those old military ships break down all the time." Had no idea that death itself was racing toward them at faster-than-light speed. Back on the Galactic Unity, chaos reigned supreme. The Vorthok had torn through 2 more security teams and was now stalking through the ship's main corridors. Its psychic abilities let it see through the eyes of its prey, anticipating their every move before they made it. When a squad of robotic defenders rolled out to face it, the creature simply looked at them, and their circuits fried from psychic overload. "Captain," Rexa made the hardest decision of her career. All hands abandoned ship. Repeat, all hands to the escape pods. But the Vorthok had other plans. With terrifying intelligence, it made its way to the ship's navigation controls. Its massive claws moved with surprising delicacy as it input new coordinates. The beast remembered its creators, remembered the little ones who used to play at their feet, could sense them calling across the void. It would answer. The Galactic Unity changed course, its engines screaming as they pushed. Beyond safe limits, the Vorthok stood on the bridge, its burning eyes fixed on the view screen where Kepler Station grew larger by the second. The creature's psychic pulse reached out ahead of the ship, touching the minds of the station's inhabitants and finding what it sought. Somewhere in that massive structure was a small human child, playing with toy ships and dreaming of adventures among the stars. The Vorthok's genetic programming, buried deep beneath centuries of conditioning and modification, began to stir. The beast didn't understand why this particular life form called to it so strongly, but the compulsion was impossible to ignore, as the transport ship crashed into Kepler Station's docking bay. The Vorthok emerged from the wreckage like a demon from the depths of space. Its first psychic scream sent half the security team into immediate shock, their minds unable to process the pure primal terror that the creature broadcast. Station alarms wailed as blast doors slammed shut, but nothing could contain what humanity had created so long ago. The hunt had begun. And somewhere in the depths of the station, a little boy continued playing with his toys, unaware that his destiny was racing toward him on claws of obsidian and eyes of fire. Commander Thex stood 8 feet tall, his 4 muscular arms each holding a different weapon. His purple skin bore the ritual scars of 100 victories, and his golden eyes had seen the fall of 3 different star empires. The Zephyrian warrior had never retreated from any battle in his 30-year career. Today would be different. "Lock and load, soldiers," he growled to his elite squad. These weren't regular station guards, they were the Galactic Coalition's finest warriors, handpicked from a dozen different worlds. Sergeant Rin from the crystal caves of Altara could slice through titanium with her energy blades. Corporal Zek's people came from a gravity-heavy world where they could bench-press small vehicles. Private Nala had cybernetic implants that let her see in 17 different spectrums of light. They moved through Kepler Station's outer ring like a well-oiled machine, their boots echoing in perfect synchronization down the metal corridors. Emergency lights cast eerie shadows on the walls as they advanced toward the breach where the transport ship had crashed. The air tasted of burnt metal and something else, something that made their primitive brainstems scream warnings. "Detected 50 meters ahead," whispered Nala, her artificial eyes glowing softly in the dim light. "It's big, Commander. Really big." X raised one of his plasma rifles, the weapon humming with deadly energy. "Remember your training. This thing bleeds, which means we can kill it. Stay tight. Watch your crossfire." And the Vorthok stepped into view. Every warrior in that corridor had faced death before. It stared down charging battle mechs, survived orbital bombardments, and walked through fields of laser fire without flinching. But when they saw the creature, something deep inside their minds simply broke. The beast stood 12 feet tall, its obsidian scales reflecting the emergency lights like liquid darkness. Its claws scraped against the metal walls as it moved, leaving deep gouges in reinforced steel. But it wasn't the creature's physical appearance that destroyed them. It was what happened inside their heads. The Vorthak's psychic scream hit them like a tidal wave of pure terror. This wasn't ordinary fear. This was fear distilled to its absolute essence. Fear that reached back through millions of years of evolution and grabbed their souls with icy fingers. Sergeant Rin, who had once held a mountain pass against 1,000 enemies, dropped her weapons and curled into a ball, whimpering like a lost child. Commander Thex tried to fight back. His 4 arms moved in perfect coordination, unleashing a storm of plasma fire that should have reduced the creature to smoking ash. But the Vorthok simply walked through the barrage, its scales absorbing the energy like a sponge drinks water. The beast's burning eyes fixed on the commander. Suddenly Vex found himself reliving every nightmare he'd ever had all at once. 47 seconds after the engagement began, 12 of the galaxy's finest warriors lay scattered across the corridor like broken toys. Some had passed out from shock, others rocked back and forth, their minds retreating to safer places. Commander Thex himself stood frozen against the wall, his 4 arms trembling as he stared at nothing. The Vorthok stepped over them without a second glance and continued deeper into the station. 3 levels down, the legendary Psi warrior, Kenth, meditated in the station's security center, his mind reaching out through the complex network of sensors and cameras. The ancient being had lived for over 2 centuries, and his psychic abilities were the stuff of legend. He'd once held back the mental assault of an entire hive mind species during the Andromedan War. His thoughts were protected by mental shields that had been tested against the psychic storms that raged around dying stars. "I can sense it," he whispered to the technicians around him. "The creature's mind is unlike anything I've encountered. but I can stop it. Kent's crystalline form began to glow as he gathered his power. His people were made of living mineral, and their psychic abilities grew stronger with age. He reached out with his consciousness, seeking to trap the Vorthok in a web of mental energy that had once held a rogue AI for 3 days straight. The moment his mind touched the creatures, Kent screamed. The Vorthok's consciousness wasn't just alien, it was wrong on a fundamental level. It had been designed by human scientists who understood fear better than any species in the galaxy. The creature's psychic abilities didn't just attack the mind, they rewrote the very concept of terror, turning courage into weakness and strength into fragility. Kent's mental shields, built over 2 centuries of training and experience, crumbled in seconds. The ancient Psi warrior collapsed to the floor, his crystalline body dimming as his mind retreated deep inside itself to escape the overwhelming horror. In the station's command center, Commander Vel watched her best defenders fall one by one. Through the security feeds, the gray-skinned woman had commanded 3 different space stations and survived 2 major wars, but she'd never seen anything like this. Her hands shook as she activated the emergency protocols. "All civilians to the core sectors immediately," she announced over the station-wide communication system. "This is not a drill. Military personnel, prepare for full evacuation protocol." The massive space station erupted into controlled chaos as millions of inhabitants began moving toward the central hub. Hovercars filled the air as families grabbed their most precious belongings and fled their homes. Alien children cried in languages from across the galaxy while their parents tried to comfort them with words they didn't believe themselves. But in all the confusion, Residential Block C was somehow forgotten. The sector's communication array had been damaged in the crash, and the automated systems failed to relay the evacuation order. The Kim family remained in their quarters, unaware that death was stalking through the corridors toward them. Little Jiho pressed his nose against the transparent aluminum window, watching the pretty colored lights of the emergency beacons flash in patterns across the station's hull. The sirens sounded like music to his 8-year-old ears, and the streams of hovercars looked like a parade of fireflies dancing in the darkness. "Look, Mama," he called excitedly to Sora. "It's like a festival." Minho and Sora exchanged worried glances, but they didn't want to frighten their son. The news feeds had gone dark, and their communication systems seemed to be malfunctioning. All they could do was hold each other close and hope that whatever was happening would pass them by. They had no idea that the Vorthok was climbing through the station's ventilation system just 3 levels above them, following a scent that its genetically modified brain couldn't ignore: the sweet, innocent smell of a human child. The final security checkpoint stood like a fortress wall between the outer sectors and the residential areas of Kepler Station. 3 layers of reinforced steel, each one thick enough to stop a speeding hovercar, protected the families who called this place home. Automated defense turrets tracked movement with deadly precision, their barrels loaded with armor-piercing rounds that could punch through a battle tank. The Vorthok looked at these defenses for exactly 2 seconds before tearing through them, like they were made of paper. Its claws, harder than diamond and sharper than surgical lasers, carved through the metal barriers as if they were warm butter. Sparks flew in brilliant cascades as the creature's massive form pushed through the twisted wreckage. The defense turrets swiveled to target the intruder, their targeting computers screaming warnings about impossible readings. But before they could fire, the Vorthok's psychic pulse fried their circuits completely. The beast moved through the residential corridors with purpose now, its burning eyes scanning each doorway as it passed. Something was calling to it, a pull so strong it felt like gravity itself was dragging the creature forward. The Vorthok's genetically modified senses could detect the chemical signatures of dozens of different alien species: the sulfur scent of Altarians, the ozone smell of energy-based life forms, metallic tang of cybernetic beings. But underneath all of that was something else. Something that made ancient programming stir in the deepest parts of its brain. The creature's massive feet left deep impressions in the station's metal flooring as it stalked down Corridor 7. Emergency lights flickered overhead, casting, dancing, shadows that made the beast look even more terrifying. Its psychic aura reached out ahead of it like invisible tentacles, probing the minds of anyone foolish enough to still be in the area. Most of the residents had already fled during the evacuation, but a few stragglers remained. An elderly Therosian couple huddled in their apartment, their blue skin pale with terror as the creature's mental influence washed over them. A family of crystal-based beings from the Andromeda sector literally shattered from fear, their mineral bodies cracking as their consciousness retreated deep inside. But the Vorthok ignored them all. It was looking for something specific, something that called to programming older than memory in apartment 7C. The Kim family sat together on their small couch, trying to make sense of the chaos around them. The communication system had finally sputtered back to life, but all they could get were fragments of panicked transmissions and emergency broadcasts that cut out halfway through sentences. "Maybe we should leave," Sora whispered, clutching Jiho close to her chest. Her maternal instincts were screaming that something terrible was coming. Even though she couldn't say what, Mina stood up and walked to their small window, peering out into the corridor through the reinforced glass. "I don't see anyone out there. If we try to run now, we might get caught in whatever's happening." Their pet cat, Nabi, had been acting strange for the past hour. The small orange tabby paced back and forth near the door, her fur standing on end, and her green eyes wide with fear. She kept making low, worried sounds that Jiho had never heard before. "What's wrong, Nabi?" the 8-year-old asked, sliding off the couch to pet his beloved cat. "Are you scared of the loud noises?" That's when they heard the footsteps. They weren't ordinary footsteps. They were massive, deliberate sounds that shook the walls with each impact. Something huge was walking down their corridor, and it was getting closer. Under the furniture, her survival instincts telling her that a predator beyond her understanding was approaching. The footsteps stopped directly outside their door. For a moment, there was complete silence. Even the station's background hum seemed to fade away, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then, with a sound like tearing metal, their door simply disappeared. The Vorthok filled the entire doorway, its massive frame blocking out the corridor lights behind it. Up close, the creature was even more terrifying than the security footage had suggested. Its obsidian scales seemed to absorb light, making it look like a hole in reality shaped like a nightmare. Its claws dug into the doorframe, leaving deep gouges in the reinforced metal. Minho and Sora froze instantly. The creature's psychic aura hit them like a physical blow, filling their minds with terror so pure and overwhelming that their bodies simply shut down. They couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe properly. Their minds retreated to the most primitive level, focused only on the impossible fear that consumed every thought. But 8-year-old Jiho had a different reaction entirely. The boy looked up at the massive creature with the same curiosity he showed when he found a new type of bug in the station's hydroponics gardens. His young mind processed the Vorthak's psychic influence differently than adult brains did. Where grown-ups saw death and terror, Jiho saw a big animal that looked upset about something. "Oh wow," he said softly, his voice cutting through the silence like a bell. "You're really big." The Vorthak's burning eyes fixed on the small human child, and something extraordinary happened. Deep in the creature's genetically modified brain, ancient programming began to activate. Memories that weren't its own stirred to life, images of human children playing in laboratories, small hands reaching up to touch scales that had once been warm with affection, instead of cold with killing intent. "Shh. You look angry," Jiho said, taking a step forward while his parents watched in frozen horror. His small voice was filled with genuine concern. "Did someone hurt your feelings?" The creature's massive head tilted slightly, confusion replacing the predatory intelligence in its eyes. This wasn't how encounters with its prey were supposed to go. Every other being it had faced had either attacked or fled in terror. But this small human showed no fear at all, only compassion. Jiho had always been special with animals. Even as a toddler, he could calm crying pets and make aggressive creatures gentle with just his voice. The neighbors often joked that he was like a tiny animal whisperer, able to understand what creatures needed even when they couldn't speak. "Are you lost?" the boy asked, his head tilted at the same angle as the vortex. "I get lost sometimes too. Scary when you don't know where you are." The creature's psychic emanations shifted. The overwhelming terror it had been broadcasting began to fade, replaced by something else entirely: confusion, longing, and deep beneath it all, a desperate sadness that had been buried for centuries. Daddy says that when animals act mean, it's usually because they're scared or hurt. Jiho continued, his small hand reaching out slowly toward the massive beast. You don't want to hurt anyone, do you? You just want to go home. The Vorthok stared at the tiny outstretched hand, and for the first time in 300 years, it remembered what it had been created for. Not destruction, not death, but protection. The genetic programming that had been buried under layers of military conditioning suddenly roared to life, rewriting the creature's entire purpose in a single moment. Sit, Jiho said with the same gentle authority he used when training Nabi or calming the neighbor's excitable puppy, the galaxy's most feared bioweapon. The creature that had destroyed entire battle fleets and driven seasoned warriors insane, with terror immediately lowered its massive haunches to the floor. Its burning eyes never left the small human child as it settled into a sitting position, its deadly claws folding neatly in its lap like a well-trained pet. The ancient bond between human and guardian, buried for centuries under the horrors of war, had finally awakened with a single word from a child's innocent lips. Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka was the first through the door, her plasma rifle raised and ready to fire. She'd been preparing for the worst: scattered bodies, blood on the walls, maybe some remaining pieces of the Kim family to recover for burial. What she found instead made her question her own sanity. 8-year-old Jiho sat cross-legged on the apartment floor like he was having a tea party, his small hand gently stroking the armored head of the most dangerous creature in known space. The Vorthak's massive form took up half the room, but it seemed perfectly content to let the tiny human pet it like a giant cat. Command, this is Tanaka, she whispered into her unit, never taking her eyes off the impossible scene. You're not going to believe this. Behind her, the rest of the emergency response team crowded into the doorway. Sergeant Kenji Nakamura, a 20-year veteran who'd seen everything the galaxy had to offer. Private Hannah Watanabe, fresh out of military academy, kept blinking rapidly, as if she could reset her vision and see something that made more sense. The Vorthak's eyes had completely changed. Where before they had burned with the fierce red of a dying star, now they glowed with a soft golden light that seemed almost gentle. The creature's psychic emanations, which had been broadcasting pure terror just minutes ago, now felt warm and protective, like a mother watching over her sleeping child. Easy, big guy, Jiho murmured, running his fingers along the ridge of scales above the creature's eyes. You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you. The Vorthok made a deep rumbling sound in its chest, a sound that vibrated through the floor and walls of the apartment. To everyone's amazement, it sounded almost like purring. The galaxy's most feared bioweapon was purring like a house cat. Dr. Alina Vasquez arrived 30 minutes later with a team of xenobiologists and enough scanning equipment to analyze a small moon. The middle-aged scientist had studied alien life forms for over 2 decades, but nothing in her education had prepared her for what she found in apartment 7C. Impossible, she whispered, watching her instruments register readings that defied everything she knew about Vorthok biology. The creature's stress hormones are completely normal. It's better than normal. Actually, they're at levels we typically see in domesticated animals during bonding sessions. She ran scan after scan, each one confirming what her eyes were telling. Her brain refused to accept. The Vorthak's psychic field, which should have been chaotic and destructive, was instead broadcasting waves of contentment and protective instinct. Its heart rate had slowed to a resting pace, and its muscle tension was completely relaxed. Dr. Vasquez called her assistant, a young Altarian named Zara, whose blue skin had turned pale with shock. You need to see these archives. I've been digging through the old military databases, and I found something incredible. The classified files hadn't been accessed in over 200 years. They were buried so deep in the military's databanks that most people had forgotten they existed. But there they were, thousands of pages of research notes, genetic sequences, and project reports from the darkest days of the Human Dominion War. Project Guardian, Dr. Vasquez read aloud, her voice growing more amazed with each word. Initial. Bioweapon development began in 2387. Primary objective. Create the ultimate protective species for human colonies under threat from Dominion forces. The files told a story that history had forgotten. The Vortex hadn't been created as weapons. Of war, they'd been designed as guardians. Human scientists, desperate to protect their children from an enemy that showed no mercy to civilians, had crafted the perfect biological protector. The creatures were engineered with incredible strength, psychic abilities, and intelligence that could adapt to any threat. Look at this. Zara pointed to a section of genetic code that glowed on her screen. Primary directive, hard-coded into their DNA, protect human offspring at all costs. This isn't just programming, it's written into every cell of their body. Dr. Vasquez felt her hands trembling as she read further. The recognition protocols were designed to identify human adults as allies and human children as primary protection targets. But after the war ended, the Vortex were abandoned on military bases and research facilities across the galaxy. Pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Generations of isolation and military conditioning had corrupted the creatures' original programming. They'd forgotten their true purpose, becoming the monsters that everyone feared. But the core directive had never been erased, had simply been waiting for the right trigger to reactivate. The adult recognition systems must have degraded over time, Dr. Vasquez realized. But the child protection protocols remained intact. All it took was contact with a human child to restore their original programming. In the apartment, Jiho continued his gentle conversation with the massive creature. "You must have been so lonely," he said softly, his young voice filled with sympathy. "Being all by yourself for so long. That's why you were so angry, wasn't it?" The Vortex's golden eyes focused on the boy's face. It made another rumbling sound. This one clearly meant as a response. The creature was trying to communicate, its advanced intelligence struggling to form sounds that human ears could understand. "Are you trying to talk to me?" Jiho asked excitedly. "That's so cool. I wish I could understand you better." The beast's massive head moved in what could only be described as a nod. Then, to everyone's amazement, it began to make different sounds. The terrifying roars and screams it had produced during its rampage. Gentle, almost musical tones that seemed to be a primitive form of language. "It's learning," whispered Dr. Vasquez, her scientific mind racing with the implications. The Vorthok is actually trying to develop a communication system that the child can understand. Minho and Sora had finally recovered enough from there. Shocked to speak, though they still stayed pressed against the far wall of their apartment. Is it ... Is it safe?" Sora asked, her maternal instincts warring with the evidence of her own eyes. "Safer than safe," Dr. Vasquez replied, reviewing her. "Scans one more time. This creature would literally die before allowing harm to come to your son. Its entire biological system is now focused on one single purpose: protecting Jiho." The boy looked up at the adults with the innocent confidence that only children possess. "He's not scary anymore," Jiho announced. "He just needed someone to be nice to him. I think he's been sad for a really long time." The Vorthex's response was to lower its massive head until it was level with Jiho's, allowing the child to pet its snout. The creature's eyes closed in what could only be described as bliss, and its purring grew even louder. "What's your name?" "Big guy?" Jiho asked, running his small fingers along the creature's jaw. "You need a good name." The Vorthok made a series of complex sounds that might have been its attempt at a name, but they were too alien for human ears to properly interpret. Jiho listened carefully, his head tilted in concentration. "That's too hard to say," he decided. "How about I call you Buddy? You're my friend now, so that's a good name for you." At the word Buddy, the creature's eyes opened wide, and it made a sound that was unmistakably pleased. It was as if the simple act of being given a Naima real name, chosen with love instead of fear, had completed some final transformation in its ancient programming. The galaxy's most feared bioweapon was now Buddy. It couldn't have been happier. The first hyperspace message reached the Andromedan Council exactly 43 minutes after. Dr. Vasquez uploaded her initial report. Within 2 hours, emergency. Sessions were being called in every major government across the galaxy. The footage of 8-year-old Jiho petting the galaxy's most feared creature spread like wildfire through the galactic communication networks. On the war-torn planet of Zarian, Prime General Krax of the Reptilian Alliance nearly choked on his morning nutrition paste when he saw the broadcast. The four-armed warrior had lost 3 entire fleets to a single Vorthok attack during the Border Wars, and now he was watching a human child treat one like a pet. "Get me everything we have on Project Guardian," he barked at his aide, his scaled face turning pale. "And find out how many of those things are still out there." The answer was terrifying. According to the hastily retrieved military archives, humanity had created over 50 Vorthoks during the final years of the human dominion. War. Most had been abandoned on remote research stations and military outposts when the conflict ended. For centuries, they'd been considered lost or dead, scattered across the galaxy like sleeping bombs waiting to explode. Now everyone realized they weren't bombs at all. They were guardians waiting for their true masters to call them home. On Kepler Station, Jiho remained blissfully unaware of the political earthquake he'd caused. He'd woken up that morning to find Buddy curled up next to his bed like an enormous guard dog, the creature's golden eyes opening the moment the boy stirred. The Vorthok had somehow squeezed its 12-foot frame into the small apartment, careful not to damage anything with its massive claws. "Good morning, Buddy," Jiho chirped, climbing onto the creature's back like it was a living mountain. "Did you sleep okay?" The Vorthok rumbled contentedly, its purring so deep it vibrated through the station's hull. Station engineers had been amazed to discover that the creature's presence had actually stabilized several structural weak points. Buddy was unconsciously using his massive strength to support the areas where his earlier rampage had caused damage. Dr. Vasquez had been working around the clock, fielding communication requests from scientists, military leaders, and politicians. Across the galaxy, everyone wanted to know the same thing. Could other Vorthoks be similarly tamed? And more importantly, what did this mean for the balance of galactic power? The Galactic Council has called an emergency session. Her assistant informed her as she reviewed the latest batch of genetic analysis reports. "They want you to present your findings in person." The hastily assembled council meeting was unlike anything in galactic history. Representatives from 47 different species crowded into the main conference chamber on Kepler Station, their various forms of life creating a bizarre menagerie of shapes, sizes, and colors. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a plasma cutter. Ambassador Thorne of the Crystalline Collective spoke first, his translucent form shimmering with nervous energy. "Dr. Vasquez, are you telling us that humanity has been sitting on an arsenal of biological weapons for over 2 centuries, and nobody thought to mention this?" "They weren't weapons," Dr. Vasquez replied firmly, pulling up holographic displays of the ancient research data. "The Vorthoks were created as protectors, designed specifically to guard human children during wartime. The military applications came later, when the original programming was corrupted." High Chancellor Vex of the Zephyrian Empire leaned forward, in her hover chair, her 4 arms gesturing wildly. "Protectors or not, these creatures destroyed 3 of our battle fleets. How do we know they won't turn aggressive again?" As if summoned by the question, the conference room doors slid open with a soft hiss. Jiho walked in, holding his father's hand and looking around at all the strange alien faces with wide-eyed curiosity. Behind them, Buddy had to duck to fit. Through the doorway, his massive frame filling the entrance like a living wall, the entire council chamber fell silent. Some of the more nervous species representatives actually fainted at the sight of the Vorthok, their consciousness shutting down as ancient survival instincts kicked in. But Buddy paid them no attention at all. His golden eyes were fixed on Jiho, tracking the boy's every movement with devoted intensity. "Sorry we're late," Minho said apologetically. Jiho insisted on showing Buddy the hydroponics gardens. And, well, ... it's hard to say no when your son has a 12-foot-tall bodyguard. Jiho looked around the room with the fearless curiosity that only children possess. "Wow, there are so many different kinds of people here. Are you all friends?" The innocent question hit the assembled diplomats like a physical blow. Here was a human child, surrounded by species that had been at war with each other for centuries, asking if they were friends. And beside him stood a creature that could level a city, content to wait patiently while his young master explored. "This is Buddy Jiho," announced proudly, patting the Vorthok's massive leg. "He's the best friend anyone could have. It's really gentle once you get to know him." To demonstrate, the boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a small toy spaceship, one of the same ones he'd been playing with when this whole adventure began. He held it up to Buddy's face, and the massive creature delicately took it in, one claw, examining it with the care of a museum curator handling a priceless artifact. "See, he's super careful," Jiho explained to the stunned council members. "Buddy would never hurt anyone, especially kids. He told me so." Ambassador Kelev. The Mantis Coalition, whose species communicated through complex chemical signals, managed to find his voice. The child communicates with it. "They're developing their own language," Dr. Vasquez explained, pulling up brain scan data on her holographic display. "The Vorthok is actually modifying its vocal cords to produce sounds that Jiho can understand. It's remarkable. The creature is literally evolving to better communicate with its charge." As they spoke, more reports were flooding in from across the galaxy. The military database searches had revealed the locations of 12 more Vorthok research facilities, and scout ships were already being dispatched to investigate. Early reports suggested that several of the creatures were still alive, dormant, but waiting. The implications were staggering. If human children could bond with these beings, it would fundamentally shift the balance of power in the galaxy. Not through conquest or war, but through an alliance between the most innocent members of humanity and the most powerful guardians ever created. "The real question," said Chancellor Vex quietly, "is what humanity plans to do with this knowledge." Ch looked up at the tall alien with innocent eyes. "We're going to help them find their friends," he said simply. "Buddy told me there are others like him out there, and they're all lonely too. Every Vorthok needs a kid to take care of. That's what they were made for." The 8-year-old's words carried more weight than any diplomatic treaty or military alliance. In that moment, the assembled representatives understood that they weren't just witnessing a scientific discovery, they were seeing the birth of a new era. As the council session continued, Jiho and Buddy wandered around the chamber, the boy introducing his new friend to anyone brave enough to approach. Some of the representatives remained terrified, but others began to see what the child saw: a monster, but a lonely guardian who had finally found his purpose. When they passed Ambassador Rin of the Aquatic Federation, Jiho waved politely and said, "Buddy wants to know if you'd like to be friends too. He promises he's very nice." The jellyfish-like being's tentacles trembled with fear, but something in the child's voice made her pause. Slowly, carefully, she extended one delicate appendage toward the massive creature. Buddy's response was to lower his great head and emit a soft, slot musical tone that somehow conveyed gentleness and respect. In that simple moment of trust between species, the galaxy glimpsed its future, not one of fear and division, but of understanding and protection. Guided by the innocent wisdom of children and their ancient guardians, the balance of power had indeed shifted, but not in the way anyone had expected. Humanity's greatest strength had never been their weapons or their technology. It was their ability to see beyond fear, to offer friendship where others saw only terror, and to believe that even the most frightening creatures could become the most loyal friends. As Jiho and Buddy left the council chamber together, hand in claw, the representatives sat in stunned silence, contemplating what this new alliance might mean for their own worlds and their own children. The age of the Guardians had begun. The Iandiri Triclod can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.